My daughter and her husband took me hiking to a scenic cliff. While I was distracted admiring the view, he pushed me over the edge. Despite the agony, I stayed completely still. Their plan was simple: make my death look like an accident and steal my $3 million inheritance. But I survived and turned their lives into a living nightmare. If you're watching this, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. I should have seen it coming when Sarah suggested a family hiking trip. My 35-year-old daughter never did anything that didn't benefit her somehow. But there I was, 6 months after burying my husband, Robert, clinging to any chance to reconnect with my only child and her husband, Michael. Mom, you've been cooped up in that house too long, Sarah had said during one of her rare phone calls 3 weeks earlier. Michael found this gorgeous trail in Colorado. The autumn colors are supposed to be spectacular this time of year. It'll be good for you to get some fresh air. As if grief could be cured with a few deep breaths and some mountain scenery. Still, I agreed because I missed her. I missed our family dinners. I missed feeling like I mattered to someone. Robert's death had left me wealthy but utterly alone. And Sarah knew exactly how to use that against me. The drive to Cliffside Trail took 2 hours from Denver. Michael chatted enthusiastically about his new promotion at the investment firm, while Sarah scrolled on her phone in the passenger seat. I sat in the back like a child, watching the landscape shift from suburban sprawl to rolling hills dotted with golden aspens. This is perfect hiking weather, Michael said, adjusting his designer sunglasses. Not too hot, not too cold, and the visibility today is incredible. The parking lot at the trailhead was nearly empty that Tuesday morning. Most people were at work, not dragging their recently widowed mothers up a mountain trail. But Michael had insisted, Tuesday's better. Fewer crowds, better photos. Let's get some pictures before we start, Sarah said suddenly, full of fake enthusiasm. She pulled out her phone. Mom, move a little to the left. Perfect. This is going to be such a nice memory. That word should have set off alarm bells. But I was too grateful for her attention to question anything. The trail started gently, winding through aspen and pine. Michael carried a big backpack, water, snacks, emergency supplies. Sarah walked between us, sometimes looping her arm through mine in a gesture that felt more staged than sincere. Remember when we used to hike when you were little? I asked as we climbed a rocky section. Not really, she said distractedly. Michael, how much further to the viewpoint? About a mile, he answered, checking his GPS watch. Trust me, it's worth it. The cliff overlooks the whole valley. Cliff, another word that should have made me pause. But I was 65, reasonably fit and confident enough for a moderate hike. What I wasn't ready for was betrayal from my own family. The viewpoint was everything Michael promised. A dramatic granite outcropping that jutted 200 feet above a rocky ravine. Below, the autumn forest spread out like a golden quilt, stunning, serene. Isn't this incredible? Mom, Sarah said, suddenly sweet. Come closer to the edge, you can see the whole valley from here. I should have noticed how they positioned themselves behind me. Should have wondered why Michael was adjusting his backpack straps. Why Sarah kept glancing at her phone. Why they both seemed nervous despite the beautiful view. Instead, I stepped closer to the edge, mesmerized by the scenery. The wind lifted my hair, and for the first time since Robert's funeral, I felt something close to peace. That's when I felt Michael's hands on my back. The push was quick, calculated, and brutal. One moment I was admiring the valley. The next, I was falling, branches tearing at my clothes, rocks ripping my skin. My nursing training kicked in even as I tumbled. Protect your head. Try to control the landing. Don't fight the momentum. But gravity doesn't care about training. I hit a ledge about 30 feet down, my left shoulder taking the full impact. Pain exploded through me like lightning. The ledge was narrow, barely 3 feet wide. One wrong move and I'd fall all the way down. Above me, I heard their voices. Sarah's panicked cry, Mom. Oh my God, Mom. Michael's urgent shouts about calling for help. To anyone listening, they sounded like heartbroken family members in shock. But from where I lay, I could see them. Sarah wasn't horrified, she was calculating. And Michael, he had his phone out, but he wasn't calling 911, he was texting someone. My medical background had taught me one crucial thing: stay still when you're injured. Assess the damage before you move. That instinct probably saved my life because staying quiet long enough. Let me hear their real conversation. Can you see her? Michael asked, his voice carrying easily through the mountain air. She's on that ledge, Sarah replied, her tone completely different from the panicked daughter act she'd just performed moments earlier. Is she moving? Doesn't look like it. Should I throw some rocks? No, you idiot, Michael snapped. It has to look like an accident. Besides, it's a 30-foot fall onto granite. She's probably already dead. My own daughter was standing 30 feet above me, calmly discussing whether I was dead yet and sounding almost disappointed. that I might have survived their murder attempt. What if she's just unconscious? Sarah asked. What if someone finds her and she wakes up? Then we stick to the story, Michael said. She was admiring the view, got too close to the edge, slipped and fell. We're devastated. We tried to save her. These things happen with elderly people. I was 65, not 90. But to them, I was just an old woman whose time had conveniently come. How long do we wait? Sarah asked. Give it another 10 minutes, Michael replied. Then we hike back down and call emergency services. By the time they get here and retrieve the body will be the grieving family. I forced myself to stay perfectly still. Even though my shoulder felt like it was on fire and I could taste blood in my mouth, every instinct screamed at me to call out, to tell them I was alive, to beg for help. But something deeper, a survival instinct born from 65 years of being underestimated, kept me silent. The lawyer said the will reading is next week, Michael continued. $3 million in investments, plus the house. We can pay off the credit cards, the mortgage, maybe even buy that place in Aspen you wanted. What about the life insurance? Sarah asked. Another $2 million, he said. This little hiking trip is going to solve all our financial problems. $5 million. That's what my life was worth to them. $5 million and the freedom to live without the burden of an aging mother who expected to be part of their lives. We should probably act more upset when we call it in. Sarah said. Really sell the tragedy? Don't worry, baby, Michael replied. I've got this. You handle the authorities, I'll handle the tears. They spent another 8 minutes discussing their performance, who would call 911, what they'd say, how they'd explain the delay in reporting my accident. They'd clearly planned every detail, even choosing this remote spot knowing it would take hours for help to arrive. Finally, I heard their footsteps moving away from the edge, heading back toward the parking lot. Then Sarah called out one last time, Mom, can you hear me? We're going to get help. The concern in her voice was Oscar-worthy. But I was done being their victim. The fall had been meant to kill me, but instead, it had shown me exactly who my daughter really was. And now, I had something they didn't know I possessed. The truth about their plan and the burning desire to destroy them with it. The pain in my shoulder was excruciating, but I was alive. I was conscious. And I was angrier than I had ever been in my entire life. Sarah and Michael had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. They thought they were going back to collect their inheritance, but they were actually walking straight into a trap they didn't even know existed yet. It took me 47 agonizing minutes to climb off that ledge. Every movement sent waves of pain through my dislocated shoulder. But fury is a powerful anesthetic. My daughter and her husband were probably calling 911 right about then, reporting their tragic accident with practiced grief in their voices. The climb down was brutal, but my nurse's training kicked in again. I knew how to splint an arm, how to move with a dislocated shoulder, how to find stable footholds on rock faces, skills I'd learned in wilderness medicine courses Robert had encouraged me to take years ago. You never know when you'll need to save someone's life, he used to say. He just never imagined I'd be saving my own from our daughter. By the time I reached the bottom of the ravine, I could hear sirens in the distance. The emergency vehicles were arriving right on schedule. Just as Sarah and Michael had planned, I followed a creek bed that ran parallel to the main trail, staying hidden in the tree line until I reached the road. About half a mile from the parking area, that's when a tourist couple from Texas spotted me, stumbling along the roadside, my clothes torn, blood streaking my face. Mom, are you hurt? The woman asked, jumping out of their SUV. Do you need medical attention? I took a fall on one of the trails, I said, which technically was true. Could you drive me to the nearest urgent care clinic? I think my shoulder's dislocated. They were kind people, the sort who'd help a stranger without asking too many questions. I told them I'd been hiking alone, taken a wrong turn and slipped on some loose rocks. They clucked their tongues sympathetically and drove me to a small clinic in the next town over. Insisting on waiting while I got checked out, the doctor confirmed what I already suspected. My shoulder was dislocated, and I had several nasty scrapes that would turn into spectacular bruises. You're lucky, he said as he reset the joint. Falls like that can be fatal at your age. At my age, everyone seemed determined to remind me how old I was, how fragile, how lucky to still be breathing. But I didn't feel lucky. I felt dangerous. I paid in cash, using a false name and address, no insurance, no ID, no paper trail. As far as the medical system was concerned, a woman named Helen Roberts had been treated for hiking injuries. Margaret Thompson, me, was still lying dead at the bottom of a cliff. Or so my family believed. The Texas couple offered to drive me home, but I declined, telling them my son was coming to pick me up. Instead, I took a taxi to a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, paid for 3 nights up front and settled in to plan my revenge. That evening's local news was exactly what I expected. Local woman dies in hiking accident. There was a short interview with Sarah and Michael, both looking appropriately heartbroken. Sarah had even managed real tears, which was more acting talent than I'd ever given her credit for. She loved the outdoors, Sarah told the reporter, her voice trembling just enough. She just wanted to see the autumn colors one more time. If only we'd stayed closer to her. If only we'd been more careful. Michael wrapped his arm around her protectively. Margaret was like a second mother to me, he said solemnly. We're going to miss her terribly. She lived such a full life and she died doing something she loved, a full life. Past tense. In their minds, I was already gone, buried, forgotten. Nothing more than a bank account waiting to be emptied. I spent the next 2 days watching them from a distance. They played the grieving family flawlessly, meeting with funeral directors, accepting condolences from neighbors, doing interviews. But when they thought no one was looking, their masks slipped. Michael sat in the funeral parlor, researching luxury cars on his phone. Sarah, during a somber dinner with Robert's old friends, was browsing vacation rentals. They weren't mourning my death. They were celebrating their windfall. The will reading was set for the following Monday. I found that out by calling my attorney's office, disguising my voice as Sarah's assistant. Within a week, everything, the house, the investments, the life insurance, would legally belong to my grieving daughter. But here's the thing about being dead, it gives you an incredible kind of freedom. Dead people don't have reputations to protect, relationships to maintain, or social rules to follow. Dead people can be absolutely ruthless. And I had 6 days to become the most ruthlessly effective dead woman who ever lived. Being dead, I discovered, is surprisingly liberating. On the 3rd day after my death, I did something I'd never done in 65 years of law-abiding life. I broke into my own house. Sarah and Michael were at the funeral home, making arrangements for my memorial service. Nothing too expensive, of course. They were still pretending to be financially struggling. I knew their schedule because I'd been following them. Grief-stricken relatives are remarkably predictable. The spare key was still under the fake rock by the back patio, exactly where Robert had placed it 5 years earlier. In case of emergencies, he'd said. Well, this definitely qualified. Walking through my own home as a dead woman was surreal. Everything looked the same, but I saw it differently now, through their eyes. Not as my sanctuary, but as their jackpot. The Waterford crystal Robert had given me for our 25th anniversary. The antique furniture from my grandmother. The paintings we'd collected. On our European trips, all of it was about to become theirs, along with the insurance money that would let them live like royalty for the rest of their lives. I headed straight for Robert's study, where he'd kept all our important documents. Sarah and Michael had already been through here. I could tell. The papers on Robert's desk were slightly disturbed, and one drawer of the filing cabinet wasn't quite closed. They'd been digging through my husband's things, probably looking for investment statements, insurance policies, anything that would help them calculate their upcoming windfall. But they'd missed what I was looking for: Robert's old recording equipment. My husband had been a meticulous man, the kind who believed in documenting everything. He recorded every business meeting, every important phone call, every conversation that might someday matter. Trust, but verify, he used to say. And always keep records. The digital recorder was exactly where I remembered it, tucked neatly in his desk drawer beside the tiny wireless microphones he'd once used for board meetings. Robert had insisted on learning how to use them, even though the technology frustrated him. Margaret, we're living in the digital age, he'd told me. We need to adapt or get left behind now. That same meticulous paranoia, his obsession with documentation, was going to save my life. I spent the next 2 hours setting up a surveillance system that would have made the FBI proud. Tiny microphones in the bedroom, living room, and kitchen. The main recording unit hidden behind the water heater in the basement, where no one would ever think to look. Everything voice activated. Everything uploading automatically to a cloud account that Sarah didn't even know existed. While I worked, I couldn't stop thinking about the woman I'd been just 3 days ago, trusting, naive, desperate for my daughter's love. That woman had died on that cliff, just as surely as if she'd hit the rocks below. The woman wiring surveillance devices through her own house was someone entirely different. I also planted something else before I left, a folder filled with fake financial documents suggesting that Robert had been hiding massive debts, and that the inheritance wasn't nearly as substantial as Sarah believed. Let them sweat while they waited for the will reading before walking out. I paused in the hallway and looked at the family photos lining the wall. Sarah as a baby, her first day of school, her wedding to Michael. In every picture, she was smiling, happy, surrounded by parents who adored her. When had that sweet little girl turned into the kind of woman who could push her own mother off a cliff for money? The answer didn't matter anymore. That daughter was gone, replaced by a stranger who treated murder as a financial strategy. And that stranger was about to learn that dead mothers can be far more dangerous than living ones. My phone buzzed with a text message. I'd kept it on me. I knew Sarah would expect it to be found with my body eventually. The message was from my neighbor, Mrs. Chen. Sarah told me about your accident. I'm so sorry for her loss. You were such a wonderful woman. Were, past tense, even my neighbors believed I was dead. I texted back, thank you for your kindness. Margaret would have appreciated knowing she had such caring neighbors. It felt oddly satisfying to speak about my former self in the past tense. That trusting, grateful woman was gone forever. The one who remained had work to do. The memorial service was held on Saturday at the Methodist Church, where Robert and I had been married 37 years ago. I watched from across the street, sitting in my rental car, hidden behind a pair of oversized sunglasses and a brown wig I'd bought at a pharmacy. The turnout was respectable, about 40 people. Mostly Robert's old colleagues and a few neighbors who remembered me fondly. Sarah had done a decent job organizing everything, though I noticed she'd gone with the cheapest flowers and clearly told the caterer to keep costs low. Michael gave a moving eulogy about what a wonderful mother-in-law I'd been, how much I'd meant to their family, and how the hiking accident had robbed them of precious years together. His performance was flawless, right down to the slight tremor in his voice, when he described finding Margaret at the bottom of the cliff, as if they hadn't pushed me over that edge themselves. Sarah wept beautifully through the entire service. Designer tissues, perfect makeup that smudged just enough to look authentic. She'd always been dramatic, even as a little girl, but this was her best performance yet. After the service, I followed the small procession of cars back to my house for the reception. Sarah had hired caterers and opened Robert's expensive wine collection, the one she'd always coveted. I parked 3 houses down, pulled out my phone and activated the recording system through the hidden microphones. Their voices came through crystal clear. The insurance adjuster is coming Monday, Michael said quietly as they stood in the kitchen. He said it's routine for accidental death claims this size, but he doesn't expect any problems. What about the will reading? Sarah asked. Tuesday at 10, he replied. Jenkins said it's straightforward. Everything to you as the sole heir. No complications, no challenges expected. Good, Sarah sighed. I can't keep pretending to be heartbroken much longer. Mrs. Patterson from next door keeps bringing me casseroles and asking if I need anything. It's exhausting. I gripped my phone tighter. Exhausting. Playing the grieving daughter was exhausting for her. Once the insurance money comes through, we can pay off the credit cards and start looking seriously at that house in Aspen, Michael said. Maybe take a trip to Europe to help with the grief, he added. And they actually laughed. My daughter and her husband were standing in my kitchen, drinking my wine and joking about spending my life insurance money on a grief vacation. I do feel a little bad about the hiking thing, Sarah said, though her voice suggested otherwise. Maybe we could have found another way. Like what? Michael snapped. Wait for her to die naturally? She could have lived another 20 years, Sarah. 20 years of family dinners and birthday calls and Christmas presents. 20 years of her thinking she had a right to be part of our lives. You're right, Sarah said. And honestly, she's been getting more demanding lately. Always wanting to know what we're doing. Always expecting invitations to everything. It's becoming a problem. I had become a problem that required a permanent solution. Their conversation was interrupted by more guests arriving, but I'd heard enough. I had them on record, discussing murder, insurance fraud, and their complete lack of remorse. But confessions alone weren't enough. I needed proof that would hold up in court. That's when I remembered the life insurance policy details. The $5 million policy Robert had taken out 2 years earlier required a waiting period for suicide claims. But there was another clause: if a death was under investigation, the insurance company would launch its own inquiry before paying out. Perfect. Time to make them sweat. I drove to the nearest internet cafe and set up an anonymous email account. Then I sent a message to the insurance company's fraud investigation division. You should look more carefully at the Margaret Thompson death claim. Ask her daughter why she took out a cash advance on her credit card the day before the hiking trip. Ask her husband why he Googled life insurance waiting periods 2 weeks ago. Some accidents aren't really accidents. I didn't sign it, but I included enough specific details to make them take it seriously. Insurance companies hate paying claims and they hate being defrauded even more. I sent the email at 11:47 p.m. on Saturday night. By Monday morning, Sarah and Michael's carefully planned inheritance would be frozen pending investigation. Phase 1 of my revenge was complete. Phase 2 was making them understand exactly what they'd lost when they chose to murder their mother. The insurance investigator arrived Tuesday. Morning at 8:30, 2 hours before the will reading. I watched from a coffee shop across the street, where the Wi-Fi was good and I had a clear view of my front door. Sarah answered in a black dress, still playing the grieving daughter. But I could see confusion on her face as Detective Morrison flashed his badge and asked to come inside. This wasn't in their script. Through my hidden mix, I heard every word. I'm Detective Morrison with the Insurance Fraud Division. We've received some information regarding your mother's death that requires follow-up. Information? Sarah asked, voice controlled but tense. What kind of information? The kind that suggests your mother's death might not have been the accident you reported. Morrison said. We'll need to ask you and your husband some questions. Michael hovered in the background, and I could feel his panic through the microphone. This is ridiculous, he said. Margaret fell off a cliff. It was a tragic accident. We were there, yes, you were there, Morrison replied. That's exactly what we need to discuss. The questioning lasted an hour. Morrison was thorough, timelines, the choice of trail, their finances, the timing of suspicious credit card transactions. Sarah and Michael stuck to their story, but I could hear the cracks forming. Why did you choose that particular trail? Morrison asked. Michael found it online, Sarah said. He thought Mom would enjoy the scenery, and you'd never been there before? No, never. I knew that was a lie. During my break-in, I'd found Michael's browser history. He'd researched that trail extensively. Emergency response times, cell coverage, accident statistics. This wasn't a spontaneous family outing. It was a carefully planned murder scene. MRSWALSH. Can you explain this cash advance? Morrison asked, and I heard papers rustle. $5,000 withdrawn from your credit card the day before the hiking trip. Silence. Sarah was probably scrambling for a plausible explanation. Money to pay overdue bills before collecting the inheritance. That was for my mother's birthday present, Sarah finally said. We were planning to surprise her next month. A $5,000 birthday present? Morrison raised an eyebrow. That's quite generous for someone you described as financially independent. Silence. Then Michael jumped in. Detective, we're grieving here. These questions are inappropriate and insensitive. Our lawyer advised us not to discuss financial matters without representation. That's certainly you're right, Morrison said evenly. But I should let you know the insurance payout is frozen pending completion of our investigation. All assets related to the claim will remain under review until we're satisfied about the circumstances of Mrs. Thompson's death. The silence that followed was deafening. $5 million, suddenly out of reach. How long does an investigation like this usually take? Sarah asked, her voice small. Depends on what we find, Morrison replied. Could be weeks. Could be months. We'll be in touch. After he left, I sat back in my chair at the coffee shop, listening through the surveillance feed as Sarah and Michael melted down. Someone knows. Sarah said, her voice trembling. Someone saw something. Or heard something. It's probably just routine, Michael said quickly, though he didn't sound convinced. Insurance companies investigate all large claims. $5,000, Michael. Why did you even let me take out that cash advance? It looks suspicious. Because we needed the money, he snapped. The mortgage payment was due, and we couldn't wait for her to die naturally. There it was, another admission, clear as day, recorded for evidence. What if they find something? Sarah whispered. What if someone saw us on the trail? What if there are cameras somewhere we missed? Then we stick to the story, Michael said firmly. We're innocent. We loved Margaret. Her death was a tragic accident that devastated our family. But the panic in their voices told a different story. Their perfect plan was unraveling and they had no idea their biggest problem wasn't the insurance investigation. Their biggest problem was me. I was still alive, still listening, and I was just getting started. I finished my coffee and checked my watch. The will reading had already been postponed because of the insurance freeze. But Sarah and Michael didn't know that yet. They were probably getting dressed right now, preparing to inherit an estate that would never be theirs. Time to teach them that dead mothers make the most dangerous enemies of all. That evening, I made my first direct move. I called Sarah's cell from a number she wouldn't recognize, using a voice distortion app I downloaded. Enjoying your inheritance, Sarah? I asked when she answered. Who is this? Someone who knows what you did to your mother. The line went dead instantly, but through the microphones, I could hear her panicked voice. Michael. Someone knows. Someone just called me about Mom. Phase 2 was complete. They knew they were being watched. Now it was time for Phase 3, making them pay. The anonymous phone calls became my specialty. Over the next week, I'd call Sarah at random times, always from different numbers, always with just enough information to terrify her without revealing how much I actually knew. Did you enjoy spending my jewelry money? I'd whisper, referencing the diamond earrings she'd sold 3 months ago, earrings she'd claimed were lost. The police are getting closer. Sarah, they know about the trail research. Then another day, Michael's gambling debts are interesting. Does he know you're planning to divorce him once you get the insurance money? That one hit a nerve. Through my surveillance feed, I heard their first real fight since my death. You told someone about the divorce papers? Michael shouted, I didn't tell anyone. Sarah shot back. Those papers are locked in our safety deposit box, but I knew about those papers long before. I'd hired a private investigator 2 months before my so-called death. Robert's illness had taught me to be suspicious about money, and something about Michael's behavior around our investments had raised alarms. The PI's report confirmed everything: Michael's gambling addiction, his affairs with 2 different women, and Sarah's secret meetings with a divorce attorney to protect her upcoming inheritance. They'd planned to kill me, take the money, and then divorce each other within a year. Even their marriage had been just another financial arrangement. Someone's watching us, Sarah said one night, her voice cracking. Someone knows everything. What if it's Mom's ghost? Ghosts don't make phone calls, Michael snapped, but I could hear the fear in his voice, too. They were both unraveling, making sloppy mistakes. Michael had started drinking heavily. Sarah was popping anxiety pills she'd stolen from a friend. Their perfect little world was collapsing. The insurance investigation was expanding, too. Detective Morrison had started interviewing neighbors, co-workers, even the hiking guide service Michael had contacted but decided not to use. Each conversation exposed more holes in their story. But my favorite part was watching their financial desperation grow. Without the insurance payout, they couldn't keep up with their bills. The mortgage was 3 weeks overdue. Credit card companies were calling nonstop. The life they'd planned to build on my death was crumbling before their eyes. We need to take out another loan, Sarah said one night, during yet another argument I recorded. Against what collateral? Michael barked. Your mother's house is tied up in probate until this insurance thing gets resolved. Then we sell something, the car, my jewelry, anything. We already sold everything valuable. Sarah, we're broke. It was music to my dead ears. But the real masterpiece began when I decided to visit them, not as Margaret Thompson. She was still dead as far as they knew. I'd become someone else entirely. I'd spent a lot of money on a complete transformation: professionally dyed auburn hair, colored contact lenses to change my eyes, makeup techniques to reshape my face. And thanks to 20 pounds lost from stress plus a little strategic padding, I looked like a completely different woman. Tuesday evening, I knocked on their door. Mrs. Walsh, I said smoothly, I'm Detective Helen Morrison, partner from the Insurance Fraud Division. Sorry to bother you so late, but we have new information about your mother's case that couldn't wait. Sarah's face went white. But she invited me in. Michael stumbled in moments later, clearly drunk. What kind of information? He slurred. The kind that changes everything, I said, settling into the same living room chair where I'd once shared countless family dinners. We found something at the bottom of the cliff. The silence that followed was electric. Sarah gripped Michael's hand until her knuckles turned white. What did you find? She whispered. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a small recording device. Just an old digital camera, but in the dim light, they couldn't tell. Your mother's personal recorder. She was in the habit of documenting her activities. Very thorough woman. Michael's face drained of color. That's impossible. Mom didn't use technology like that, but Sarah knew better. She remembered how meticulous I'd always been, especially after Robert's cancer diagnosis. Her expression told me she was already imagining all the conversations that might be on that device. The recording cuts off abruptly. I continued. But you can clearly hear your voices, talking about insurance policies and financial problems. We want a lawyer, Michael said quickly. That's certainly your right, I agreed, standing. But you should know, the district attorney plans to file charges tomorrow morning. Murder in the first degree. Insurance fraud, conspiracy. The recording provides clear evidence of premeditation. Sarah started to hyperventilate. Michael began pacing like a caged animal. Unless, I said casually, you'd like to cooperate with our investigation. Help us understand exactly what happened on that trail. What kind of cooperation? Sarah asked through her tears. A full confession, details about the planning, the execution, the financial motives. In exchange, we might negotiate lesser charges. I left them with 24 hours to decide. Knowing they'd spend every second of it in hell, they called Detective Helen Morrison at 6 a.m. The next morning, Sarah's voice was hoarse from crying. Michael's was shaky from withdrawal. We want to make a deal, Sarah said. Meet us at the police station at noon, I replied. Bring your lawyer, of course. I had no intention of meeting them there. Instead, I spent the morning setting up the final phase of my plan. The real Detective Morrison was having quite a morning, too. I'd sent him all my surveillance footage, detailed financial records showing Sarah and Michael's debts, their insurance research, and suspicious behavior patterns, along with the fake confession I was about to get from them. By the time they arrived at the station, Detective Morrison was already waiting with real arrest warrants, but I wasn't done. While they were being processed downtown, I was back at my house, the one they thought they'd inherit, making final preparations. I'd been living in a motel for 2 weeks, but tonight, I was coming home. The surveillance equipment stayed on. I wanted to record everything that was about to happen. They made bail that evening using the last of their credit card cash advances. When they got home, exhausted, broken, they found me sitting in their living room. Not Helen Morrison. Not a detective. Me, Margaret Thompson. Their supposedly dead mother, very much alive and absolutely furious. "Hello, darlings," I said as they walked through the door. "We need to talk," Sarah screamed and fainted. Michael tried to run, but I'd already locked the doors. "Sit down, Michael," I said calmly. "Let's discuss your financial planning strategies." When Sarah came to, she looked at me like I was a ghost. "You're dead," she whispered. "We saw you fall. You're dead. Reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated," I said dryly. "Though your disappointment is duly noted." Michael stood frozen, his brain refusing to accept what he was seeing. "I have some good news and some bad news," I said. "The good news? You're not going to prison for murder since your victim is still breathing. The bad news is attempted murder still carries a significant sentence," I said. "Mom," Sarah started, but I held up a hand. "You lost the right to call me that when you pushed me off a cliff for my life insurance money. I prefer Margaret now." I had prepared a detailed presentation of their crimes, recorded confessions, financial evidence, a timeline of the murder plot. Everything documented, witnessed, and legally admissible. "Here's what's going to happen," I said. "You're going to confess to attempted murder. You're going to plead guilty to insurance fraud. You're going to spend the next several years in prison thinking about what you lost. When you decided I was worth more dead than alive, we can explain," Michael said desperately. "We were in debt. We were desperate. We never meant to actually hurt you. You pushed me off a 200-foot cliff," I replied. "Exactly which part of that wasn't meant to hurt me?" Sarah was crying again, not the crocodile tears from my memorial service, but the kind of sobs that come when someone's whole world collapses. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry, Mom. We made a terrible mistake." "No," I corrected. "You made a calculated decision to commit murder for money. Now you'll live with the consequences." Then there was one more surprise. I pulled out a thick legal document. "There's something else you should know about your inheritance," I said. Both Sarah and Michael looked at the papers with desperate hope. Even facing attempted murder charges, they were thinking about money. "The will reading you missed while you were being arrested," I continued, "contained some interesting provisions." This was my masterstroke, thought out during long motel nights while they believed I was dead. I'd had my attorney draw up a new will 3 days before the hiking trip. A will Sarah and Michael knew nothing about. "I changed my will 2 weeks ago," I said. "Funny thing about a mother's intuition. Something told me I needed to be more careful about my estate planning." Sarah went white. "What kind of changes?" "The kind that reflect my growing concerns about your financial stability and decision-making." I opened the document and read the relevant sections aloud. "In the event of my death under suspicious circumstances, or if my daughter Sarah Walsh or her husband Michael Walsh are charged with any crimes related to my death, all assets previously designated for their inheritance shall be transferred to the following charities." I read the list: the children's hospital where I'd volunteered, the animal shelter where Robert had adopted our dog, the scholarship fund at my old nursing school, organizations that would use the money to help people, not fund luxury vacations and gambling debts. $5 million, I said. Going to people who deserve it instead of people who tried to murder me for it. Michael looked like he might have a heart attack. "You can't do that. We're your family. Family doesn't push family off cliffs," I replied. "Besides, this is academic. I'm not actually dead. The money was never theirs to begin with." Sarah stared at the document in growing horror. "The date," she whispered. "The date on this will, it's from before the hiking trip." "That's correct," I said. "I had concerns about your lifestyle choices and wanted to ensure my money would be used responsibly." The truth was worse than my performance. I had already planned to revise my will, not solely because I suspected they'd try to kill me, but because I'd grown tired of bankrolling their reckless spending. "The hiking trip only sped things up, so even if you'd succeeded," I said, "you still wouldn't have inherited a thing. You would have committed murder for nothing." The silence that followed was crushing. All their planning, all their risks and betrayal, for money they would never receive. "What happens now?" Sarah asked, voice barely audible. "Now you go to prison," I said simply. "The district attorney has enough evidence to convict you both. The recordings, the financial records, your behavior patterns, it's all very compelling. And then you live with knowing you destroyed your family for money you were never going to get. You traded your mother's love for a pipe dream. You are exactly the kind of people who deserve to lose everything. I stood, gathering my papers. Oh, and one more thing. I'm donating your house to charity, too. I watched them register the blow. Turns out I co-signed your mortgage, which makes me a co-owner. Since you'll be unable to make payments from prison, I'll assume full ownership and gift it to the homeless shelter downtown. Michael lunged toward me. But I was ready. The pepper spray I'd carried since my resurrection stopped him cold. Violence seems to run in the family, I said as he writhed on the floor. Good thing I've learned to defend myself. I walked toward the door, then turned back for one final comment. For what it's worth, I really did love you both. But love has its limits, and attempted murder is definitely beyond them. I left them there, crying, defeated, and finally understanding the true cost of their greed, but I wasn't finished with them yet. The trial became a media sensation. Mother returns from dead to testify against daughter's murder plot. Dominated headlines across the country. I gave only one interview to a local reporter who had written Robert's obituary with unusual kindness. How does it feel to be betrayed by your own child? She asked. It feels like clarity, I replied. For the first time in years, I see people exactly as they are instead of how I hoped they might be. Sarah and Michael's defense attorney tried everything, temporary insanity, financial desperation, even emotional manipulation. None of it worked. The recordings were too clear, the evidence too overwhelming. But the real revelation came during Sarah's testimony. Why did you decide to kill your mother? The prosecutor asked. Sarah's answer shocked everyone, including me. Because she was going to cut us off anyway, she said, her voice flat, emotionless. She'd been asking too many questions about our finances, making comments about our spending. I knew she was planning to change her will. The prosecutor pressed further. So this wasn't just about inheriting her money? No, it was about getting it before she could give it away. Mom was always threatening to donate everything to charity if we didn't shape up. We couldn't risk waiting. I sat in the gallery, stunned. They hadn't tried to kill me for my money. They'd tried to kill me to stop me from giving it away. The very act of trying to teach them financial responsibility had convinced them that murder was their only option. Did you consider simply improving your financial management instead? The prosecutor asked. Sarah laughed bitterly. Have you seen the bills we had? The debt, we were drowning. Mom's money was the only way out, and you never considered asking her for help directly? She would have said no. She was always lecturing us about living within our means, about taking responsibility. She never understood that some of us don't have the luxury of perfect financial planning. The luxury, she said it like, responsibility and self-control were privileges I'd been born with, not qualities I'd earned through decades of sacrifice. But the most devastating moment came when Michael took the stand. I never wanted to hurt Margaret, he said, tears streaming down his face. But Sarah convinced me it was the only way. She said her mother would never miss the money, that she was too old to enjoy it anyway. Too old to enjoy life? The prosecutor pressed. Sarah said Margaret had already lived her life, had her marriage, raised her family, traveled with her husband. She said it was our turn now, that we deserved a chance to live well while we were still young enough to appreciate it. Something inside me broke hearing that. My own daughter had convinced her husband that I was finished living, that my remaining years were worthless compared to their desire for instant comfort. But Michael wasn't done. The worst part, he continued, is that Sarah was already planning to divorce me once she got the inheritance. I found the papers in her purse while we were waiting for the insurance investigator. I was going to help her commit murder, and she was going to take all the money and leave me anyway. The courtroom erupted. Sarah screamed at Michael, calling him a liar. Michael screamed back, accusing her of manipulating him from the beginning. Their defense crumbled into chaos, finger-pointing, shouting, pure panic. I watched them destroy each other with the same cruelty they'd once aimed at me. And I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. Sarah was sentenced to 15 years for attempted murder and conspiracy. Michael got 12 for cooperating and playing a slightly lesser role. Both received extra time for insurance fraud and identity theft. As they were led away in handcuffs, Sarah turned to me one last time. I hope you're satisfied, she spat. I am, I said simply. Finally, but there was still one more chapter left in this story. 6 months after the trial, I did something I'd never done in my entire life. I threw myself a party, not a birthday, not an anniversary, a still alive and loving it party. I invited everyone who had stood by me through the trial, Detective Morrison, my attorney, the neighbors who testified on my behalf, even the Texas couple who helped me after my fall. We gathered in the backyard of my house. The same house Sarah and Michael had once planned to inherit. I'd had it professionally redecorated, erasing every trace of their presence. For the first time in years, it finally felt like home again. You know what the funny thing is? I said to everyone during my impromptu speech. Being pushed off that cliff was the best thing that ever happened to me. They laughed, assuming I was joking, but I wasn't, not even a little. For 65 years, I had defined myself by how much other people needed me. I was Robert's wife, Sarah's mother, everyone's helper and supporter. I measured my worth by how useful I was to my family. I raised my glass of champagne, the expensive kind Sarah had always admired but never been offered. But dead people, I continued, don't have to be useful. Dead people don't have to be accommodating or grateful or endlessly forgiving. Dead people can be absolutely ruthless in pursuit of justice. Detective Morrison stood and lifted his own glass. To Margaret Thompson, he said, the most dangerous dead woman I've ever met. Everyone echoed. To Margaret Thompson later that evening. After the guests had gone home, I sat on my back deck watching the sunset, thinking about the strange journey that brought me here. I'd received dozens of letters from elderly people who had seen the news coverage. Stories of financial abuse, emotional manipulation, and family members who believed inheritance was an entitlement, not a gift. My case had apparently inspired others to speak up, set boundaries, and stop being victims. 3 different publishers had reached out, wanting to buy the rights to my story. Movie producers, documentary filmmakers, even a Broadway composer, interested in turning my resurrection into a musical. But the most meaningful contact came from an organization that helps elderly abuse victims. They wanted me to be a spokesperson, to share my story and encourage others to fight back against family exploitation. You've shown that being old doesn't mean being powerless, the director told me. Your story gives people hope. Not something I ever expected to be giving out at 65, but I liked the sound of it. Then my phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The caller ID showed a state prison number. Margaret Thompson, the automated voice said. You have a collect call from Sarah Walsh. Will you accept the charges? I thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. No, I said, and hung up. Some bridges, once burned, should never be rebuilt. Some relationships, once poisoned by murder attempts, can't be healed by apologies or explanations. I had a new life now, built from the ashes of the old one. A life where I was valued for who I was, not what I could provide. Where my money was mine to spend or donate however I pleased. Where family was defined by love and respect, not blood and obligation. Sarah and Michael had tried to kill me for $5 million they were never going to get anyway. Instead, they gave me something far more valuable, the knowledge that I was strong enough to survive anything, smart enough to outwit anyone who underestimated me, and ruthless enough to destroy those who tried to harm me. They thought they were pushing a helpless old woman off a cliff. Instead, they awakened a force of nature they never saw coming, and that force of nature, me, was just getting started. I poured myself another glass of champagne and smiled at the setting sun. Tomorrow, I'd be meeting with the Abuse Prevention Organization. Next week, I'd be flying to New York to discuss the book deal. And next month, I'd be launching a foundation to help elderly victims of family financial abuse. My daughter tried to end my story by pushing me off a cliff. Instead, she gave me the perfect opening chapter for the rest of my life. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and if you have a story of your own, share it in the comments. Your voice matters.